Fortnite knows how to keep it fresh. After not being involved at all with the game over the last 3 seasons, I decided to jump back in at the end of Season 10, and boy oh boy, was I blown away with how many new concepts have been woven into the game's fabric. Never has Epic been afraid to experiment with their juggernaut, as many new additions have been added and removed from Fortnite, regardless of whether players receive them openly or not. I mean, we're talking changes to the map, the addition of new weapons and new items, the limitation of material caps, and the accumulation of a bunch of vehicles, and these are just a few of the highly contested changes that have been made to the game over the years. And Season 10 has been a celebration of Fortnite's past, as tons of changes have been made to the map to get people feeling nostalgic. And guess what? Those changes haven't been just cosmetic, as currently there are a ton of alterations to gameplay in a bunch of different areas all over the map. For example, the Horde zombies appear in Retail Row, Loot Lake has a giant portal to the sky, Greasy Grove has a mandatory dance battle, and currently Tilted Towers acts as Gotham City, where players can free fly around as Batman. That's amazing! Partnering with outside companies and licenses has allowed Fortnite to keep expanding into more and more households through brand recognition. And all of this has been in an effort to keep Fortnite feeling fresh at all times, with new experiences to lure in returning players. And while I've really enjoyed getting back into Fortnite over the last few weeks and experiencing all of these consistent changes, I must admit that those consistent changes and updates come at a very human cost, and its name is crunch. So today, in this episode of Psychology of Gaming, the series where we look at how psychological principles are worked into games and how games can affect us psychologically, we take a look at Fortnite, its constant updates, and the adverse mental effects that crunch periods can have on developers. So, originally this video wasn't even going to be in this series. It instead was going to be about praising how Fortnite has unapologetically changed up gameplay mechanics consistently in an effort to prioritize a fresh and new experience over everything else. The game's insistence on always offering additional features has been the most defining aspect of the game during its massive success run. Changing up the experience in sometimes subtle and sometimes grandiose ways has allowed the game to lure in new players as well as keep existing players, even if some choose to take a break. And I have no problem admitting that I've loved my Season 10 experience with Fortnite and have found it as enjoyable as my favorite times playing the title during Season 4. But the reality is, a vast majority of players will never know about the psychological toll it's taken on Epic's employees to continuously update this game every week in order to maintain its primary goal. And that leads to a lot of conflict within me because on one hand, I'm enjoying my time with the game, which I'm sure is what the developers want. But at the same time, reports have come out on just how bad working conditions have been at Epic for the developers. And unfortunately, it's not a problem exclusive to Epic, as we've seen similar reports regarding BioWare during the Anthem development and Rockstar Games during Red Dead Redemption 2's development. It's not something new, and so while I can't really condemn Epic or Fortnite because they're putting out a product I enjoy, I think it's important to acknowledge how negative prolonged periods of stress can be on the workers and raise awareness on this issue. So here we are. According to multiple articles from Polygon and Kotaku, working conditions at a lot of video game development studios are not all well, as crunch periods have affected tons of them. Crunch is a term used in the industry to describe a period in which employees are expected to work extreme overtime hours in order to complete projects leading up to the release of a game. For some employees, this means working in excess of 70, 80, or even 100 hours of work a week, which can be noticeably damaging to a person's mental and physical state. Now, in an era where more and more of our favorite games are being built around the games as a service model, crunch is becoming a round-the-clock issue instead of one contained to the final months of a game's development cycle. This is particularly the case for Fortnite, a game that is being updated daily in terms of cosmetics, weekly in the form of challenges and small gameplay tweaks, and every few months in the form of large overhauls to the map, themes, weapons, and mechanics with the release of each new season. While this allows the game to constantly feel innovative and new, it means that developers are constantly in a period of crunch, always pressured to meet the demands of the next day, week, or month's updates. And crunch periods are oftentimes a wrecking ball that can destroy a developer's lifestyle and mental and physical health if they're forced to endure it over long periods. That's because crunch creates a lot of stress, and stress is easily one of the lifestyle factors that determines our overall health the most. Humans experience stress for a whole multitude of reasons, and if you're over the age of, say, being born, you probably don't need me to tell you some examples of things that can stress you out. Now, stress isn't always a bad thing, as it's most simply described as being the brain's reaction to any demand. Sometimes stress allows people to be more focused on what they're doing if used properly over short periods. It's why so many people are able to complete school projects right before the deadline, because the stress of not completing it is enough of a motivator to overcome a procrastinator's mindset. It allows the person to focus and complete the assignment in time, even if it isn't as good as it could have been. But most often, let's face it, stress is associated with the brain and body's negative reaction to the demands of life. And being overworked is certainly one thing that meets the criteria for generating negative stress, which is the case for developers finding themselves in crunch periods. Being in a stressful situation triggers the release of a few different hormones throughout the body. In immediately life-threatening situations, adrenaline and norepinephrine are released to trigger the fight or flight response in us. On the flip side though, in non-life-threatening, stressful situations, such as working 80 or 100 hours a week, the body releases what's called cortisol, which takes a little longer to feel the effects of. Cortisol is often referred to as the stress hormone, and as previously mentioned, it can give us the boost we need in small doses over short periods of time to get things done. However, if released over long periods of time, cortisol can wreak havoc on the body and mind in a multitude of different ways. So we know that stress triggers the release of cortisol, and over a prolonged period of time, this can result in the following symptoms: the inability to sleep, forgetfulness, inability to focus, feeling out of control, feeling on edge, increased heart rate, increased blood pressure, and a desire to shut down, and these are just a few things. Ultimately, it results in extreme feelings of anxiety and tension, and that's exactly what we are seeing from a lot of the reports that are coming out. Here, in a Polygon article written by Colin Campbell, one Epic employee was quoted as saying, quote, "I hardly sleep. I'm grumpy at home. I have no energy to go out. Getting a weekend away from work is a major achievement. If I take a Saturday off, I feel guilty. I'm not being forced to work this way, but if I don't, then the job won't get done." And in another article on BioWare's conditions, Jason Schreier of Kotaku reported that people at the company often had to take stress leaves, which were weeks and weeks of missed work time to try to balance out their mental health. People were being worked to death across the board, and taking time off to get better meant the work got shifted to someone else, and really, nobody wanted to live with the guilt, so many people tried to endure the stress. These conditions undoubtedly created some of the anxious effects I mentioned earlier, but stress often takes a physical toll on the body alongside of a mental one. During periods of prolonged stress, the brain itself actually begins to shrink in capacity, especially in the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of our brain that controls rational thought. This makes it harder for us to think through things logically and makes us more willing to give in to raw emotion. Simultaneously, neural connections in the amygdala, which is the part of our brain that stimulates feelings like fear and aggression, are strengthened, making us more likely to experience those negative feelings. And if that wasn't enough, at the same time, neural connections in our hippocampus, which is the part of the brain that helps with learning and memory retention, can be damaged or destroyed, making it harder for us to focus, learn, and complete tasks. And all of these things going on in the brain can leave people experiencing what psychologists call brain fog, which is a phenomenon that occurs when a person mentally feels out of control or unable to process rationally or logically. Now, needless to say, this can really affect a person's ability to work, but on a bigger sense and a more important level, it can leave a person in shambles mentally. It's the reason why so many developers are having to take stress leaves so that they can get themselves right again and reach a point where they don't feel the pressure to produce. And those developers who are taking time off are smart to do that, because prolonged bouts with stress can be a doormat for various mental health issues like Alzheimer's, depression, severe anxiety, and more. That's not to say that stress directly causes these conditions to develop, but the correlation between the two is inarguable. You can look up just about any study between stress and mental health issues to see the correlation for yourself. And all of this leaves gamers in a tough spot, because honestly, what are we to do? If we don't support the products by buying and playing them as a protest to the conditions, then the game will undersell, and the people who busted their butts will get laid off much faster than any of the corporate suits will. At the same time, continuing to play these games continues generating profits that encourage crunch periods to keep existing. I mean, there really isn't a good answer to this issue. Well, I mean, there is, but it's pretty unlikely to happen. CEOs and corporate bigwigs would have to set the bottom line aside for a bit in order to focus on employee health and allowing for games to have a longer development period. But in the case of huge games, that's hard to do, as big sources of income are needed to keep companies up and running. The solution may be to have higher-ups take pay cuts in order to afford more employees so that work can be more distributed to avoid dramatic crunch experiences. For now, all we can really do is reach out to our favorite gaming studios and let them know that developers don't deserve to suffer. Gaming is a hobby we all love, and it shouldn't be something that leaves people mentally exhausted and drained. Now, hopefully this gets better with time, but it's trending in the wrong direction right now. And so it's important to make as many people within the industry, whether they're diehards or casuals, more aware of this issue. So get out there and share articles like Jason's and Colin's and spread the word. So the final point is, don't feel bad about enjoying the games you love, but I guess let's just try to make sure as many people in this industry as possible are enjoying their experience within it. Well, that brings us to the end of another episode of Psychology of Gaming. If you enjoyed this episode, check out some of the others in the series, maybe even the ones I alluded to throughout this video. Thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like if you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing for more, check me out on Twitter at NopeNapNarp, and as always, have a nice day, and take care.